Okay, good morning, everyone. Happy Tuesday. Today, we're going to talk about the buying process for condos and co-ops and kind of what it looks like from getting a new client all the way to getting to the closing table and what to do afterwards. So again, there are 7 steps. The first is the review and search phase, kind of preparing yourself and looking at properties. The second is to submit an offer, negotiate. The third is the deal sheet and contract prep. The fourth is the contract signing. The fifth is mortgage and funding. The sixth is the board process. And the seventh is going to be the closing. Again, on all these steps, I've kind of put at the top and highlighted who's kind of in control and who's kind of running the show. Again, our job through this whole process is to be there and help everyone get to where they need to be, right? We're helping the attorneys, we're helping the mortgage brokers, we're helping people get the information that they need. And throughout this process, the most important thing is to be in touch with your buyer, making sure that they understand the whole process and what's going on. So again, the first thing that you always want to do when you get a new client is kind of do the buyer consultation. And that's a review of the process, right? That's reviewing what they're looking for in terms of location, price, size. That's getting them to sign the agency disclosure and the fair housing disclosure form. Again, these should really be signed the first time you meet with people, or before you take them out. You can always send them over DocuSign. You guys all have free accounts through Weichert. Also introducing to them what the revenue financial statement is. And again, we'll get to that in a little bit, because knowing about their debt to income ratio is going to determine certain properties that they will qualify for. You also want to make sure that they have a real estate attorney. And again, if they don't, introduce ones that you work with and that you like. If they do, you always want to call them to introduce yourself, because having that attorney ready is a really important step in the process once we get to an accepted offer. The same thing goes with a mortgage broker. If they have their own, great, introduce yourself. If they don't, please feel free to introduce them to Doug. You also kind of during this phase want to go through their verification of their pre-approval, right? It's really good to have it in hand before you take them out, if possible. Sometimes people don't want to give it to you to offer you to meet with them. That's okay. Again, I tend to wait till I meet with them the first time to get any financial information, because who wants to send very kind of personal information to someone they've never actually met in person. But when you're looking at the pre-approval, you want to make sure that it has a price, a down payment, and terms, right? What the interest rates are and things like that. Sometimes you'll get a pre-approval letter that just has, Donald is pre-approved with XYZ Bank, and that's it. And that's really not enough, because that means that they don't have a sense of what the numbers are, and that's important for them. Make sure it's for the property type. Again, sometimes people will come to you and they're looking for a co-op, and their pre-approval will be for a single or multifamily. Sometimes they'll come to you and they'll be looking for a co-op, and it will be for a condo, right? And so you want to make sure that they know the difference, and that the mortgage person that they're working with knows the difference, right? That's why it's so important to have a New York-based mortgage broker or mortgage bank that they're working with. And again, if they don't have a pre-approval, introduce them to Doug, right? Doug can help get them pre-approved. If he can't help them, he can at least see kind of what they're qualified up to, and we can get them to the right person. So again, the next phase is kind of the easy phase, the fun one. You're showing properties, getting feedback, following up, right? I always like to keep track with every client that I'm working with on a Google sheet, right? And that way we can keep track of, when we're in the field, what they've seen, what the pricing is, what the common charges and maintenance or taxes are, depending on, again, the property type. And we can also, again, kind of help educate them to the market, right? If you see something and they're like, well, I'm kind of interested in this, and you reach out to the broker, they're like, oh, we have multiple offers over the asking price. That helps you craft their expectation of the market, right? Part of the buyer consultation, which you have already done, is really going into what's happening in the market, right? In certain markets, things are sitting on the market for months. In certain markets, and again, here in New York, every market is every neighborhood and every price point. That creates a separate market, right? Studios under 400 are different than one bedrooms between 500,000 and 600,000 within the same neighborhood. And keeping that in mind is important. But what the Google Sheet does is it lets you keep track of what's gone into contract, so they can see the pace of the market. And sometimes that helps them when they're crafting an offer to come up with something that's going to be accepted given the market conditions. One thing that's important to note, and again, my suggestion is that if they want an inspection, right? And one of the questions that we often get when we're working with condo and co-op buyers are, should I do an inspection? The way I answer that is I say, you are entitled to do an inspection if you would like one. In the case of a condo or co-op in New York City, you're probably paying somewhere between $500 and $750 for an inspection. And because the mechanicals of the building, right? The boiler, the roof, the elevator, if there is one, the heating systems and things like that are usually controlled by and maintained by the building. Those usually are not things that an inspector can check out in a condo or co-op inspection, right? So what can they check out? They can check out the stove, they can check out the refrigerator and things like that, right? Probably things the person can go and look and see if it's in working order or not themselves. So 99% of the time, I would say my clients choose to not do an inspection because it's not worth the funds they're going to pay, right? Those mechanical systems and those things in the apartment are things that are being taken care of by the building. And as we get to the kind of the due diligence process, the attorney is going to be checking into that and asking the management company, when was the roof replaced? When was the facade done? And things like that, right? So if your client does want to do an inspection, I always recommend doing it before you put in an offer or while you're in negotiation, right? It's not something like might happen in New Jersey or Pennsylvania where you do an inspection after you have an accepted offer and you renegotiate the price, right? Our inspections are really for informational purposes only. And so it's something that you want to do if they have concerns about things and want to adjust that in their offer price. So once you found the property and, this is just, again, a general review. This is our buyer consultation. It's available in the Google Docs file, so you can download it. It's an important thing to have to be able to, again, explain this whole process to any buyers that you might be working with. And again, on this page here on the left, it really goes through the process of purchasing a home in New York City. So it's definitely something that you want to check out if you haven't gone through it yet. So again, two things that I covered, which I just want to delve into a little bit more detail about, are the revenue financial statement, as well as debt to income ratios, right? So when you're putting in an offer for a co-op, you not only need a pre-approval or proof of funds if they're paying cash, but you also need a revenue financial statement. And what this statement is basically a generic asset liability statement to show the assets that a person who's going to be buying the home has, their liabilities as well as any debt they have, right? And that goes on the liability side. This is important because when you're presenting an offer to a seller's agent, that seller probably has a good idea of what the board is looking for financially in terms of a purchaser, right? What they're looking at in terms of debt to income. And we'll get to that point in a second. And so introducing this form, and again, there is an Excel version of this in the Google Documents file. You can get it, you can go over it if you have questions about it. Again, if it's two people applying, you have an applicant and a co-applicant. It's one person, just the applicant. But this is a form that you're going to need to submit with any offer, right? And this allows the seller and the seller's agent to compare offers based on if they think the person will be board worthy or not, right? And when we say board worthy, we mean if they will be approved by the co-op board. Sometimes when you're putting in an offer on a condo, they will ask for this statement as well. So I always just introduce it to my buyers at the beginning so they know, hey, we might need this for an offer. Again, the times that you usually don't need this are if it's a condo or if it's a sponsor sale, right? A sponsor being the developer of the building, they're selling the unit, there's no board approval required. They don't usually care too much because as long as the person can get financing, they're probably good to go. So the reason that this is important to have at the beginning is because you really want to get a sense of your buyer's debt to income ratio, right? And what a debt to income ratio looks at is monthly expenses over monthly income. Most co-ops have a maximum debt to income ratio, and they will not approve an application if it's over that number, right? There are other factors that go into approval, like personality, and we'll talk about that a little bit more down the road. But most co-ops have a number that they usually will give, and the seller's agent usually has a sense, right? Stricter co-ops will have, and again, there are some co-ops that don't allow you to have any debt, right? So it has to be zero. And some of the Fifth Avenue apartments, some of the ones on Central Park West say you can't have any debt whatsoever. You have to have crazy, reserves after closing, no financing's allowed, yada, yada. Most co-ops will have a number that's somewhere between 25% and 33%. Right? And so what that looks at is what portion of your monthly income, and again, that's what's coming to you on a monthly basis, is going towards your debt servicing, right? And going towards the liabilities that you have. And so it's a comparison of all debt payments plus mortgage plus maintenance divided by their monthly pay, right? So let's say you have someone who pays $200 a month in student loans. And again, on all of these things, we're looking at what the monthly outlay is, right? If they have credit card debts and they have to pay a minimum of $500 a month, that's going to go into this number. If they have alimony or child support or anything that they have to pay on a monthly basis, and again, these will be things that are showing up kind of on the right side of that revenue financial statement in the liabilities. They'll have something they have to pay every month. And so again, in this example, we're saying that they have a $200 worth of student loans they have to pay every month. They have $2,600 in the mortgage that they're getting on this property that they're purchasing. And again, if someone's purchasing a second home or purchasing something for a child, you have to include their primary residence and this residence that they're purchasing, right? So their taxes, their mortgage, their maintenance, all that stuff. So in this situation, again, $200 in student loans, $2,600 in mortgage payments, and $1,600 in maintenance. They're looking at $4,400 a month that they are paying towards this, what we'll call debt servicing, right? And again, that includes the maintenance fees. If they have a salary of $14,000 a month, again, all we do is we divide 4,400 by 1,400, multiply it by 100, we get a percentage of 31.4%, right? And again, if the co-op told you, if the seller's agent said that they require 30% debt to income maximum, then you're over by 1.4%, right? And so you have to come up with a solution, right? And there are different ways of doing it. The person could put more down, right? If they have liquid assets to do that, so that their mortgage payments go down and that gets to that number, or find a lower interest rate, or maybe pay off their student loans, right? There are different things that you can do to decrease that number, right? And the best way to look at this also is, again, if you're looking at someone who's looking to buy a condo, or sorry, a co-op, and if they have $14,000 a month in salary, right? And again, you think that of that, they can basically pay 30% in, or most of the buildings in the neighborhood require a 30% maximum debt to income ratio. You can take that 14,000, multiply it by 14,000 times 0.3, right? And we get $4,200 a month. So $4,200 a month is what they can do. So again, in our situation, we have to decrease it by $200. So again, paying off those student loans or putting down maybe another $50,000 would decrease the mortgage by a bit. Or if they can find a bank that gives them a better interest rate, that number will go down. So again, knowing someone's income is important at the beginning, because then you can start to craft things about what they should be looking at potentially based on the co-op's policies. And again, you'll find a wide range. You don't really have to worry about this as much if it's a sponsor unit and in certain neighborhoods. But again, always asking the question when you're representing someone looking to buy a co-op of what is the maximum debt to income that this co-op is looking for? And they will give you a number, right? Or they have some kind of sense. And again, I just had a situation where the person has a ton of assets. They don't, they make good money, right? They make about $250,000 a year. They were buying something and the building was very strict on the 25%. So he had to put down another $200,000 basically. And again, he could do that because of his financing. He didn't want to because interest rates are so great right now, but it is something that he ended up doing. So again, if you have a question about debt to income, I'll send out these slides. You can come back to this. It's a pretty simple calculation, but again, it helps you get a sense of what that person for that co-op can afford to spend every month on their debt servicing, again, on their mortgage, their maintenance, any outstanding loans that they have. So again, you found this perfect property, right? Now what you want to do is submit the offer. And the first offer is always in writing. What it's going to include is the price, financing, so what they're putting down, any inclusions. So again, let's say it's an apartment and they're not selling the furniture, but your buyer's in love with the furniture and they want that included. You're going to put that in with the offer, right? The closing date, things like that. If your buyer wants the seller or the sponsor, if it's a sponsor sale, to pay any of their closing costs or to give a credit at closing or something like that, this should always be in writing also in this first offer. You'll include your buyer's name, address, vital information, a short bio just to give them a sense of them. And again, along with this offer, which again is either in the body of an email or is a form that's again in the Google Drive, you'll also send their pre-approval letter from the bank Or if it's a cash offer, proof of funds showing the purchase price plus some closing liquidity that they have. If they are buying in a co-op, you will also supply the revenue statement. And again, sometimes condo sellers and their broker will ask for it, even if it's a cash offer, right? Even if it's a cash offer for a co-op, you have to include the revenue financial statement. And again, sometimes the seller will take a letter from the purchaser. Again, usually if it's your primary residence, buyers will want to put in a letter with it just to tell about them and how much they love the apartment. That is something that you will send along with the offer. And the offer is submitted to the seller's agent, right? From there, they'll usually be back and forth, negotiations and things like that. Again, you do your best to represent your buyer and their point of view. And again, the most important thing to remember is that we never tell someone the offer that they should put in, right? The number has to come from them themselves. The buyer has to put in the offer number themselves. We can help educate them about the market, about a general range of acceptability. Again, what I tell my buyers usually is that, depending on how long it's been on the market, what's happening with the market. Again, if it's a well-priced 2-bedroom downtown and it's been on the market for a day, usually I will say that most of the time this will go for at or above the asking price. Well, I want to put an offer for 10% off. Not a problem, right? This is your number. I'm going to do my best to get this accepted, but I want to keep you aware of what's been happening in the market, right? Again, my rule of thumb is usually if it's within, if it's been on the market for a little bit, if it's within 10% of the asking price, you will probably get a counter. Again, sometimes people are extremely aggressive. Our job is to represent them and what they want to do. And again, sometimes the best learning for a potential buyer who thinks that the market is not great and that it's a buyer's market when in reality it's a seller's market is to put in a low offer. And sometimes the best thing is a rejection, right? They just don't get a counter at all. And they're like, well, why didn't they counter me? Well, because he told me it was too low. Again, you can educate them through using information that you find on OLR, on Urban Digs, on experiences that you've had and that people share at our office meetings and things like that. And again, after you submit the offer and negotiate, you'll come to accepted terms, right? And that's when you have what we'll call an accepted offer. This is an offer that I put in. And again, I've changed the terms and stuff like that, but this was the full offer that I put in, right? Hi, Jonah. I'm authorized on behalf of my clients, John Jacobs and Pietro Carlos, to offer $1.7 million for apartment 5 at 44 Sullivan Street. They'll be putting down 20% and obtaining financing from Chase Bank for the remaining 80% of the purchase. They're able to close extremely quickly and have an attorney selected, right? And again, if you know their attorney's information, which at the point you're putting in an offer, you should know that. I put their name in, right? They're using Randy Chang. He's ready to go and very knowledgeable about the market. Their pre-approval and revenue form is attached. Again, this was a co-op that they were getting financing on, right? They're all, this was a condo, sorry, but I still attached it. They're also asking the sponsor to pay all sponsor building New York State and New York City closing costs, right? Again, this was part of the offer. This was a new development in this case. And so they really wanted them to pay that. We got most of those paid for by the sponsor. Again, depending on what's happening with the market, and please go back and watch the video on new developments and sponsor sales. I talk about those closing costs, the differences, what you can negotiate and what might not be negotiable and things like that. They are longtime New York residents who make an amazing addition to the community at 44 Sullivan. They're currently residents at 25 Central Park South and excited to move back to Soho. Thanks so much. Looking forward to put together, right? So I put this in, this was the almost verbatim email, just I changed the addresses, put those two forms on. We got a counter. We went back and forth, had an accepted offer, and then we moved on to the next steps, right? So the next step is what we would call the deal sheet and contract prep, right? And again, you're still kind of in control, you and the other broker. So what will next go out is a deal sheet, right? And so it's also called a term sheet, an offer acceptance sheet. Again, there are tons and tons and tons of things that this is. And what happens is that the buyer agent will send in the body of an email to the seller's agent the information on the deal, right? So what is that on your side? Again, you're representing a buyer, so you're sending over on the deal sheet. And again, when I say deal sheet, I usually send this in the body of an email. Your buyer's information, right? Their name and address, their attorney's name, address, and contact info, phone number and email, your name, Weikert's address, your contact information, and your license number and Weikert's license, right? And if you say, I don't know my license number, you can go to the Department of State website. and look it up there on the public license search. And if you're doing a deal with someone else and you don't have their license number, you can look it up there, right? So everyone's license number and the firm they work for and the firm's address is all public record. It's all available on the Department of State website. So then that goes to the seller's agent. The seller will then put it into a form. And again, I'll show you on the next slide what that form looks like. All the information about the deal. And from this sheet, the attorney will negotiate the contract and do the due diligence, right? So what does that mean, right? So we have nothing to do with the actual contract. And so if your client asks you, hey, does this look right in the contract? My answer is always, hey, unfortunately, I'm not an attorney. This is something you would talk to Randy about. If you want to give him a call, I'm happy to reach out on your behalf, right? We are not attorneys. We should not be working as attorneys. This is very different than in New Jersey, very different than in Pennsylvania, where the agent is actually doing the contract. We let the attorneys do the contract, right? We put together that offer acceptance sheet, term sheet, deal sheet, whatever you want to call it. It gets sent out by the seller's agents to the two attorneys, and then the attorneys do kind of all the back and forth. During that time that they're doing the contract, right? And the steps are usually a draft contract is sent from the seller's attorney to the buyer's attorney. The buyer will come back with comments. The seller will then review it with their agent, with their client. The buyer will then review it with their client. They'll come to terms, and that's what happens. But during that time, during that back and forth of the contract prep, the attorney for the buyer is also reviewing all pertinent due diligence information for the unit and the building, right? And so that's a few different things. Number one, it's probably what we call a questionnaire. And a questionnaire is a list, it's usually like 4 to 5 pages of questions that this attorney wants answered from the management company. It's also reviewing the offering plan, which is the documentation of the formation of the building. It's the building financials, the budgets and audited financials for the building. Again, those are provided by the seller and the seller's broker to the attorney. It's a review of the house rules, which is rules for the owners and shareholders in the building. It's the sales packet, so the board package that will be a next step for us. And the sublease package, right? Especially for a condo or a co-op, if they want to rent it out in the future, what that looks like. You know, other things can be involved. If they want to do renovations, what the alteration agreement looks like. Again, there's a bunch of information that they will review. And that tends to take about a week to do all that review to get the contract done and ready to go. So again, this is an example of a deal sheet. I changed the information on it. But basically, again, when you're working with a buyer, you'll fill out this portion, or again, all you do is you send over your buyer's name and address, the attorney's information, your information as the buyer's broker to the seller's agent. They will complete the rest of this and then send it to the two attorneys, right? And so again, there are different names of this: offer acceptance sheet, deal sheet, transaction sheet, deal worksheet. Everyone calls it something different, but all it is all the pertinent information about the deal. This is something that you will have to submit to me when you're submitting the contract once it's signed to put it into the Weichert system. So just keep that in mind that this is something that will be on there. So again, the attorneys have done their due diligence. They've worked out the contract and things like that. The next stage is the contract signing stage, right? And this is where your buyer will sign the contract. And when they sign, they put down a 10% deposit. These days, monies are often wired. Oftentimes, the contract is signed virtually, over DocuSign or some other media like that. So again, the important thing to remember here is that they put down a contract deposit when they sign the contract, right? And most of the time it's 10%. Sometimes if they're putting down less towards financing, again, usually with a condo or co-op, they have to put down 10 or 20% for the down payment. But sometimes, again, if they're buying a single family, maybe they'll put down 5%. So that's usually the same number here. They'll put down 5% at the contract signing. Again, let's pretend that these people are buying a co-op that requires 20% down, right? When they sign the contract, they are probably putting down the contract deposit of 10%. That other 10% will be paid by them at the closing to get to that down payment of 20%, right? So again, using the terms contract deposit and down payment interchangeably is incorrect, right? The contract deposit is the amount of money put down when the contract is signed. The down payment is the amount total paid at closing by the purchaser, right? So kind of get those two things separated in your mind. It's important to kind of keep that distinction. So the buyer signs, puts down the contract deposit. The seller signs, It is only at this point that you're officially in contract and the property is off the market, right? Until this point, anything can happen. The buyer could walk away, right? You know what? I don't want this apartment. There's too many issues with the building. I'm going to walk away, right? And the only thing they're out is whatever they paid for their attorney or maybe for the questionnaire, right? At this point, the seller can accept another offer, right? They could get a higher offer, and there's no real, there's kind of an ethical responsibility, but there's no fiduciary responsibility to the seller, or sorry, to the buyer by the seller, because they're not in contract yet, right? Again, that's why it's so important for us to make sure that our ducks are in a row with our buyer, that they have their attorney, their mortgage, everything's ready to go on that side, and that the attorney gets all the information they need pretty quickly, right? And that's where in that due diligence period that we're checking in with the attorney and making sure that they have everything they need, asking if there's anything that they haven't gotten back, keeping people moving, right? Because again, we want our buyers to be protected, but we don't want them to lose the deal at the same time. So the next stage is what we would call the mortgage and funding stage, right? And so this is where the bank gets involved in earnest. And what happens is, as soon as the contract is countersigned, the attorneys will send it out to everyone, right? And at that point, your buyer should give a version, or have you give a version of that contract that's fully executed to the mortgage officer so that they can start the mortgage process. So they get the contract. Their first step is to order an appraisal, right? And the appraisal will happen usually these days within about 2 weeks. It tends to take a little bit longer than normal before. The appraiser goes in and looks at the property for the bank, make sure it exists, and they look at what has sold recently in the neighborhood to make sure that the bank is not spending too much for this mortgage, basically, right? So again, they come in, they order the appraisal comes in. Again, usually about a week or two after the appraiser comes, the appraisal comes in. If it appraises for the number, and again, most of the time it appraises at or above the number that the person's buying it for, then you continue on. If it does not appraise, then there are a couple things, right? So either another appraisal needs to be ordered by the bank, the buyer has to go with a different bank, or there needs to be some sort of change in price. Or the buyer can put down more money because, again, what the bank is doing is they're giving funding for a percentage of the purchase price, right? Maybe up to 80%, maybe up to 90%. So if that purchase price comes in too low, there's a difference and something has to happen. So once you're good on the appraisal, and again, if you get a bad appraisal, just let me know, we'll work it out. It's not the end of the world. We've had it reversed before. It's usually not a big problem. Oftentimes there's an issue with the appraiser himself or herself who is not used to working in New York City, right? Sometimes you'll get an appraiser who picks up something, in Queens, who usually works out in Long Island, and there's a big difference in the property, right? And so they're not using the correct property types. I had one where it was a condo. They used only co-op comps, and they didn't even use the sales that happened in the building recently, right? So we got that number way up, and everything went fine with the first bank. So the loan process continues, and during that stage, your buyer is going to be providing a ton of information to the bank. The bank usually also orders a questionnaire to get information on the building. And usually about 4 weeks after the appraisal comes back, you get what's called a commitment letter. And the commitment letter is a letter from the bank saying, yes, we will loan to Sally buyer in 123 Main Street, right? And that is needed for the board package, right? That commitment letter from the bank is needed as part of the board package. And again, they'll send what's called Aztec agreements for co-op. That is also called a recognition agreement. And that is basically an agreement between the bank, the board in the building, and the buyer saying, hey, if the buyer defaults, the bank can sell it as long as they go through board approval process, right? So it's basically protecting them. And so those are also needed for the board package, right? And so once you get that information, that's when you can really finalize the board package, which is gonna be our next step, and get everything ready to submit. Again, if you have a cash deal, you can just skip this step, right? You don't have to worry about this at all because there's no funding. So the board process is the next phase. And this is one that's kind of, again, spearheaded by you, the seller's agent, as well as the management company, right? So the board package is going to be prepared by you as the buyer's agent in coordination with the buyer, right? And again, there's a video on how to put together a board package. Once you get to that point, let me know, we can go over it. If you have a mentor, they can go over it with you. You're gonna put everything together, you put it in a nice package. Some companies use a system called Board Packager, an online suite to upload everything in there. Some of them do physical paper packages. You need between 1 and 10 copies, again, depending on the building. Again, we'll go through that once you get there. But please know that your buyer cannot just do the package and submit it, right? This is something that is coordinated with you, and it must be reviewed by the seller / the seller's agent before submitting, right? That is usually non-negotiable. It's usually in the contract. So again, the process is you and your buyer prepare it, you review it with the seller's agent, you make any edits that are needed, and then everything is submitted when everyone's agreed on the package that's being submitted. And again, a board package will happen for both a condo and a co-op. The only time for a condo and a co-op that you don't need one is if it's a sponsor unit, or if for some reason and it's usually in a condo, the condo doesn't have a board package, right? That can happen. The package will be submitted with a bunch of checks and information to the management company. They'll do the credit check, and then they'll forward it onto the board, right? And so the board can then either ask for more information or for an interview date. If they ask for an interview, it's going to be scheduled by the management company. It's often virtual these days. The thing you want to tell your buyer is that they will make that interview date work, right? No matter what's going on in their lives, they will make that interview date work, unless there's some personal emergency or something happens last minute, right? Oh, we're going to be in Hawaii. Great, get on the Zoom in Hawaii. Who cares? So what this board interview is it's a time for the board to get a sense of the applicant off paper, right? So what they're doing is they're getting a sense of their personality. They're getting a sense of what they are in terms of interest in that. It's not a time for your buyer to ask questions about the building. When does trash go out, right? When am I going to get an answer? And again, once you get to this step, we'll go over this again together before, so you can coach your buyer and how that looks. Again, the board interview happens for co-op. Condo usually doesn't have a board interview. Again, every once in a while they do, but then you're given board approval. Again, what does board approval mean for condo and co-op? And again, these are specific things that are very different, though we use them interchangeably. For a condo, the board has the right of first refusal for a sale or for a rental as well, right? And so they will sign a document which waives their right of first refusal. So what the board has in a condo is not the ability to reject something. What they have is the option to purchase the unit at the same terms, and most of the time that just means the price, as the contract, right? The only times I've ever heard this happening is when someone has tried to way undersell a property and the board did not want that to be a recorded sale, right? Or a sale to happen on the open market. Let's say you've got a building of 10 one-bedrooms, they all sell for $2 million. One of the sellers is like, you know what, I'm going to sell this for $1 million. I just want to get out of here. And they're kind of just cashing out and leaving. The board probably does not want that to happen, right? Because they don't want the most recent comp in the building to be $1 million, because then their value has gone down significantly. And so in a couple cases, the board has gone and said, you know what, we're going to buy this unit, we'll rent it out for a few years, and when the market's better, we'll sell it. They exerted their right of first refusal. They bought the unit instead. Again, this only happens a handful of times that I've actually heard of. And so again, it's really a rubber stamp on the approval process, and they just want some documentation to make sure everything's good to go. In a co-op approval, the co-op has the right to approve or deny for whatever reason, right? And their approval is you can purchase this. Their denial is you don't get to purchase this, right? And again, they usually do not give a reason. And your buyer, if they are rejected, is going to say, why was I rejected? What's going on here? You won't get a reason. The email from the board, and again, over the course of my career, I've had, I think, 5 board turndowns at this point. They don't give you a reason. Just to let you know, the board has rejected the application for this, boom, right? Again, they don't give a reason because this opens them up for potential liability or lawsuits. In Westchester, Westchester County has passed a law where the boards now have to give a reason for rejection, right? And hopefully at some point New York will do the same. Because again, usually rejection is for an arbitrary reason and it shouldn't be rejected. So again, what are the rejections that we've gotten to the bottom of? And again, if you do get a rejection, there are things that we can sometimes do. Sometimes you can get something to be reconsidered by the board. The purchase price is too low, right? Like the condo, exerting the right of first refusal to not have a low price, the board, and again, my most recent board turndown was because the purchase price was about 50,000 less than everything else that had sold in the building, and they didn't want the price to go down. So we were actually able to go back in, renegotiate the contract price, and get a board approval. So it can happen. I've heard of not wanting a celebrity, and again, they won't say this outright, but they said the person would take too much media attention to the building. You know, maybe they say they allow gifting, right, where parents or family members are giving money for purchase, but they don't want that, or they don't want certain financing, right? You know, they really want people who can afford to put down 50%, even though the building allows for, you know, 80% financing. Maybe it's someone that they wanted to reject because they knew the person was going to rent out a unit, right? And again, there are some very flexible co-ops that I've heard that they were rejecting investors, even though it's allowed by the co-op, because they wanted to keep the building owner occupancy at a certain percentage. Again, there are a million reasons they could. I hate the color of their hair, right? And again, racism is something that gets into this, and that's why people will never give a reason, and that's why, you know, co-ops are a little annoying in terms of this. But you know, most of the time, your person, if they get to that stage, they're going to be approved, right? As long as they don't blow the interview. And again, we have someone who blew the interview because they said they were going to like start a band and do practice in the building, right? So there are things like that where they're like, they're just going to reject them, and they won't say why, but that's why. So again, you know, there's a difference between an approval and a rejection in a co-op and a condo. So the next phase and the final, second to final phase is the closing stage, right? So you get your board approval, condo or co-op. So now what's happened, right? The bank, if there's financing, will be made aware of the board approval. And they take some time to get to a point where we have what's called the clear to close, right? That means that they have all the funds in an account, they can close at any date. Once you have the clear to close, then the closing is scheduled by the two attorneys. Again, they'll ask everyone when they can close. Your next step is to really send the invoice to the seller's attorney so you get paid, to do a final walkthrough of the apartment with the seller's agent. Again, usually that's the morning before, the morning of or the evening before the closing. The closing will happen. Oftentimes it's remote. 99% of the time we're not invited to the closing anymore because of COVID. They want to keep the number of people in the room as small as possible. We're the least important people, but we can be there for moral support. Again, before we go to the closings, it was fun. You kind of chit chat with everyone. Your buyer's excited. I would bring you know, potentially bring a gift. I usually would actually wait and see them afterwards and bring a closing gift to their house so we could reconnect again. Again, after the closing, follow up, see how the move-in went. You know, ask for a review on Zillow. That will link to your My Whitecard account. You can do some just sold marketing in the building, saying, "Hey, I just brought a great buyer. I'd love to bring someone for yours if you're interested in selling." Or, "Hey, have you thought about selling? It's a great market to sell in this building." Stuff like that, right? So think of all the follow-up you can do. Oh, that was the last stage, sorry. And I think the number was off, so I apologize. But again, the buyer consultation is a way that you can review this whole process kind of on one page. But again, I will send out these notes and things like that. And with that, I'm going to stop the share and stop the recording, but I am happy to answer any questions. Actually, I'll keep recording in case you guys have questions, but then we'll take it from there. So any questions or anything I can go over with you guys?
Jason, I have 3 questions, and you can take them in whatever order.
Why don't we do, let's do one at a time, so then we can answer them.
Okay. Should the brokers be copied on all attorney correspondence or just when the final contract goes out?
Usually we are not CC'd on all correspondence because there's no reason for us to be. Again, the attorneys should be doing their job during the due diligence process and between the contract review. It's really not something that we as brokers need to be CC'd on, right? Sometimes your buyer will ask you, "Hey, what do you think about this?" Again, if it's about the contract, you should really put them back on the attorney and say, "You know what, why don't we have a conference call so you can ask them that question together."
Okay. Question 2, can the contract deposit be applied to other closing costs at the closing?
So I would say that's kind of it's a interesting question. Usually the contract deposit will be at minimum a percentage of the down payment. So usually, no, you wouldn't. That would just go to the bank towards that. You know, the way that funds are dispersed at closing, and again, you know, a few days before closing, your purchaser will get a list of all, you know, either who to wire the money to or who certified checks need to be made out to. Because again, if you think about it, let's say they're buying something for $1 million and they put down a 10% contract deposit, right? So the seller's attorney will have, sorry, $100,000. I apologize. $100,000 in at closing, right?
Yeah,
so
that's the contract. That's the $100,000
is the contract deposit. Yeah.
Deposit.
Yeah.
And then.
And then again, there'll be a bunch of different closing costs. So let's say all in, your buyer has to pay, between your buyer's contract deposit plus their down payment, the difference, right? So if they're putting down 20%, there's gonna be another $100,000 they're putting down. Plus they have their attorney fee, there are all these different fees that they'll be paying, maybe a flip tax, whatever it is. So let's say all in, they're paying, with all closing costs, let's say I'm 1.1 million. I'm just gonna use that. That's way high, but let's use that as an example, right? So if the bank is giving financing for 80%, the bank's gonna bring some money to the table, but they're gonna be putting down that other $300,000, let's say, right? So how that money is dispersed at closing is gonna be dictated by the seller's attorney, the buyer's attorney, and the bank. So you really don't have anything to do with that either.
Okay. And then my third question, you said in 99% of the things most buyers don't want to shell out the money for inspection. On the final walkthrough, if there are latent defects that become apparent between the purchase and the closing, how does one handle latent defects or appliances that do not work and things like that?
Yep. So every contract is going to be worded differently. And again, that's not something that we handle. That's on the attorneys. I would say the majority of contracts in New York state that the apartment is going to be in as is working order at closing, right? Sometimes that means that all the appliances are working and they will work at closing. And so, again, the attorney that I tend to work with, his new recommendation, just to be very safe, is before they sign the contract, we go in and they just make sure all the appliances work, that there's no huge cracks or holes or anything like that, and to take pictures of the walls to make sure there's no cracks, right? That way, when you go to the final walkthrough before closing, if there is an issue, you can compare the pictures, right? Again, let's say you're doing the final walkthrough, and I'll use my, most amazing example of this, right? I sold an apartment on Park Avenue. It was $4.5 million. It was a friend of mine's mom who was selling the apartment. The apartment, the purchaser had sold a $15 million home on Park Avenue a bit further south. He was going to gut renovate the whole home. And at the final walkthrough, it was uncovered that the wine fridge from 1980 did not work anymore, right? And so this guy requested a $10,000 credit to buy the most recent top of the line wine fridge, right? And it had to be negotiated. This almost held up the closing, where the brokers, Eunice and I, had actually ended up buying this guy a brand new, comparable, same manufacturer wine fridge to satisfy him. So we spent $3,000 instead of $10,000, which was good. But again, oftentimes, let's say the stove doesn't work, right? So you're at the walkthrough, that you find out the stove doesn't work. Everyone agrees, okay, the stove's not working. Then, again, that's why we do the walkthrough, hopefully the day before, but usually the morning of. Again, they might send the super to try to fix it. They might hold some funds in escrow to make sure it's fixed, or they might say, I don't want to handle this. We'll give you $1,000 at the closing, right? And that is something that, again, we will let the attorneys know, and the attorneys will work out with their clients what are agreeable terms.
Thank you.
Kirsten, Donald, Paris, any questions from you guys?
Yeah, this is Donald. I had a question about, I had a couple of questions. First one is about the attorney. Because
Sure.
they're so deeply involved, is there a specialized co-op attorney that you're supposed to utilize, or can it be a general real estate attorney, and does Wyker have an in-house attorney that we deal with?
Sure. So we do not have an in-house attorney. What I can say is that we do have, many of us have attorneys that we've worked with on multiple occasions. We can, again, provide you that list of people. Again, my main recommendation is always to give out at least 2 names of people so they can talk, see what's a good fit. Again, attorneys, price themselves very differently. Again, based on if it's a co-op or condo, if it's a seller or buyer. So it's important for them to have an idea of what the pricing is and things like that. I would say for a Manhattan co-op condo attorney, you're usually looking at something between $3,000 and $5,000 for the transaction. So it is it's an investment, but again, it's really protecting the buyer, and they do a lot of work in this process. There are attorneys who work in outer boroughs and even in Manhattan who charge a lot less. Some attorneys charge by the hour. I always recommend to my clients, no matter, use whoever you want. I have no problem with that, but make sure that they are a New York City based real estate attorney. That's the most important thing. I can tell you, we've had a ton of deals blow up because someone's like, oh, I want to use my cousin or something like that. And either the seller said, we're not working with someone who's not a New York attorney because we know this is going to muck up the deal, or they've gone through it and the person doesn't know what they're doing, and it just like destroys the deal. So New York-based real estate attorney is very important. Again, if you need recommendations, I'm happy to send you over my list. Again, anyone on here can kind of share them. But that's the most important thing.
Okay. The second question is in reference to the contract deposit. You made it very clear that the contract deposit is completely separate from the down payment. The question is the contract deposit something that the buyer gets back?
So it goes towards the down payment. So
Okay.
In my kind of example, they put down 10% at contract signing. If they're putting down another 10%, then they're putting down 20%, they will put down another 10% plus their closing costs at closing.
All right.
Yeah.
And
so they kind of add the contract deposit. Breaks up. Yeah. So basically, if you take the down payment minus the contract deposit, the rest of that is what they're going to pay at closing plus their closing costs.
Understood. Can a co-op be purchased as an investment property or second property? Does it have to be the buyer's primary residence?
Depending on the co-op, some allow it. So I would say 98. I don't know. Again, I'm making a vast majority of co-ops will require that the owner is a primary resident. Some of them do not, right? Some allow pied-à-terre, so they can use it as a secondary home. Let's say they have a home in New Jersey, they want a place in the city. Some buildings allow that, and some will allow unlimited subletting, right? I have a co-op for sale right now on East 73rd Street. It's a 1-bedroom. The pricing is great. It's $415, and that co-op allows unlimited subletting from day one, right? So you can buy it as an investment property and rent it out.
Thank you. Last question. You mentioned sponsored unit. What's a sponsored unit?
So a sponsor unit is a unit that is being sold by the developer of the building. And I use the term developer loosely. That can mean the person who, built the building from the ground up, or it could be the person who converted the unit from from a rental building into a condo or co-op. There's a video I did on new development sales, and that goes into sponsor units and things like that. But there are some buildings, again, besides like the brand new condos and things like that are going up, where the person who holds a lot of the units in the building, again, that can be for different reasons. They just decided to never sell everything. There might have been rent controlled or rent stabilized tenants who then left the units and now they're selling them. They might have kept them as investment units and now they want to sell them. Again, a lot of co-op buildings have sponsor units, which come up. And again, there are differences in closing costs, but there are also differences in terms of not needing board approval. So one of the deals I'm working on right now in the West Village, it's a building, 281 West 11th Street. The sponsor owns 6 units in the building. And so we're buying a sponsor unit. So we don't have to go through board approval, right? And so these people are buying in a building that doesn't allow dogs, but they can have a dog because the sponsor can say, yes, you can have a dog. They can have a dog in a building that usually doesn't allow dogs. So there are benefits to it, but there's also a few more closing costs that they're going to be taking.
Nice. Thank you very much.
Yeah. And again, there's not an overwhelming number, but you can check off in OLR when you're doing a search on the right side of a sales search. You can check off sponsor unit, and you can also check off no board approval. So those are 2 things that could be considered. And again, sometimes you can be more flexible with the terms, right? Eunice and Michelle work on a building in Brooklyn where, the co-op for resales requires at least 20% down, but the sponsor has done some sales at 5 or 10%. So sometimes sponsor units can be a little more creative with what they allow for financing as well.
Jason, did I hear you correctly? You said in a condo, someone bought a sponsor's unit, and although the building has a no pet policy, the sponsors could override that?
It's in a co-op, yes.
Really?
Yeah, or again, you know, a building might not allow co-purchasing, but a sponsor, they don't have to abide by the co-op rules for that sale.
Okay, and one other question. So
But hold on, one thing, if let's say it's a co-op and someone buys a sponsor unit, right? That doesn't mean that they can just unlimited sublet or anything like that, because after the closing, they are then subject to the rules of the building. But if in the contract it says there's a dog that's living in this apartment, then they can have that dog. And again, that's something to work out with the attorneys. But if, let's say that dog, let's say they sell the unit, right? They can't sell it to someone with a dog just because they had a dog. The next buyer is subject to board approval and all those rules.
Okay. So the sellers have attorneys, the buyers have attorneys. Are there any attorneys involved representing either the co-op or condo board in the contract?
So
Do
for the
boards have
contract,
attorneys?
for the contract itself, no. But for the closing, yes. You know, you will coordinate with, and the buyer and seller's attorney will coordinate with the co-op attorney for the closing and everything like that. And again, that's usually done directly through the management company.
Okay. And one other thing, can you send me the listing you just referenced on 73rd Street? It's a co-op with unlimited subletting approval.
Sure.
Thanks.
Awesome. Any more questions, guys? These are all great ones. So, Paris, anything from you?
No, I'm just listening.
Okay, cool. So I'll send out this video and the slides later today. Again, just as a reminder, every document you can ever possibly need should be in that Google Drive that I shared with you guys. If you need me to share it again, send me an email with your Gmail account you want me to share it with. Again, please only use those forms going forward. It's important that we kind of stay on top of that. So thank you guys for your time. Have a great rest of the